live from our studios in Kingstown, St. Vincent and the Grenadines. It's your favorite Thursday night show, Up Late with Sehon Marshall. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome the host of tonight's show, Sehon Marshall.
Good night, and welcome to tonight's edition of your favorite Thursday evening show, Up Late with Sehon Marshall. I'm your host, Sehon Marshall, and let me thank you so much for joining us this evening. And as I've been promising through some promos during the week, we have quite an exciting show ahead of us. At this point, I'm going to do exactly what I do every week at this time, which is share the live. And I'm going to also ask you who are watching to share the live. And I'm going to share some really interesting stats with you as well. All right. But let me share the live quickly. And where are we now? Yep. Yes. And I'm sharing again. One more share. Share. We're getting there. Again. We are sharing on okay, I'll do that again another time. Discard that. Let's do it this way. Yeah, I do this every week, right? And you go, see, and come on, you need to get somebody to do that for you. I probably should. Share, copy the link, go into this, and so people who are just tuning in can log on immediately and get the program. All right, good. So we're good now. All right. So like I promised you, we have a special guest with us who's already in the studio backstage and will be joining us in a bit. But let me thank you for supporting the program thus far. I must say that the program has been growing. I'm thankful for those of you who've moved over to YouTube and are looking at the program on YouTube. And I noticed that about 35% of you are looking at the program from your television screens. So that's perfect. That's exactly one of the reasons why I encourage you to come to YouTube and look at the program. Because, when you use it on your phone with Facebook, your phone can ring, you can get a message, and, you're always distracted. So you miss parts of the program every time you have to come out to answer your phone. Look at it on your television screens. Another interesting thing is just about 80% of the individuals watching this show every week have not yet subscribed to the channel. Listen, please hit the subscribe button so that you can get the notifications when the program has started so that you wouldn't miss it. Because a lot of people say, oh, I didn't realize that the program started, and especially individuals in North America who are behind us. It totally slipped them sometimes and they miss the start of the program. All right? So, listen, hit the subscribe button, subscribe to the channel so that you'll get the notification whenever the program starts. All right? Now, finally, you notice how I'm dressed tonight, right? I did a promo a few days ago, was it yesterday? And one of my good friends, Nazim Gittins, messaged me and go, dude, what was this, the Larry King lookalike? And, it didn't cross my mind at all. At all, it didn't cross my mind. And so I took a screenshot and I was like, am I giving a Larry King vibe? And everybody who's familiar with Larry King thought, yeah, the suspenders and so on gave it away. So I decided tonight I'm going to give a Larry King vibe, right? So for those of you who are old enough to remember Larry King and Larry King Live, that is where I'm going with that. So yeah. All right. So tonight, as mentioned, I have a special guest joining us, Professor Justin Robinson. He is Pro Vice Chancellor and Principal of the UWI Five Island Campus in Antigua Barbuda. Professor Robinson writes on his Facebook page some really, really thought-provoking pieces, and there are a number of them that I've read recently, and they've really jumped out at me. One in particular that we're going to be dealing with tonight. Now, please, I crave your indulgence because some of you may not have seen the piece or read it, and as a backdrop for tonight's discussion, I think maybe I should read it. It's probably going to take about 7 minutes or so for me to read it, but please, let me crave your indulgence because this is what we're talking about. Professor Justin Robinson asks the question, are we in a Cold War? A CARICOM perspective. He says, on Tuesday evening, On the evening of Tuesday, December 16th, Antiguans and Dominicans received unwelcome news. The Trump administration had announced an expanded travel ban, and among the countries added were Antigua and Barbuda and Dominica. For most of us, this is not an abstraction. This is the aunt in Brooklyn we visit every summer, the cousin's wedding in Miami next spring, the graduate program, the job interview, the family reunions that stitch Caribbean life to American life. For 30 years, that connection required no particular political consciousness to maintain. You got your visa, you boarded your flight, you moved between worlds. The US was not a foreign policy challenge. It was simply where family lived, where the culture that shaped your music and dreams originated. And now, suddenly, it is complicated, and many Caribbean people have no framework to understand why. I've been thinking about this since a conversation with one of my graduate students several weeks ago. We had been discussing the American military buildup in the Caribbean. The USS Gerald R. Ford off Venezuela coast, over 15,000 US personnel deployed, more than 80 people killed in strikes on boats that the Americans claimed to be carrying drugs. She asked what seemed to be the most naive question. But what has Venezuela done to the US? Her confusion itself is itself the story of a generation raised in peace and deeply embedded in American culture. For those of us who came of age during the Cold War, military buildups required no explanation, rooted in bilateral grievance. Great powers project force because geography is destiny, and spheres of influence must be maintained. Grenada did nothing to the United States in 1983, yet American paratroopers still landed at Point Salines. But my student, like most of our generation across CARICOM, have no living memory of this world. She was born into a Caribbean that had become almost, without anyone noticing, a zone of peace. Not as diplomatic aspirations, but as a lived reality. For 30 years, the great powers largely left us alone. The United States remained the fabric of Caribbean life due to family, remittances, and culture, but not as a military presence. The limited Russian presence retreated, and China arrived with infrastructure loans, not warships. This generation lacks a framework their grandparents possessed for understanding why superpowers behave as they do. There is something else that Washington and other great powers consistently fail to grasp: the Caribbean's instinctive, bone-deep anti-militarism. It is not ideological pacifism. It is simply that war is not our lived reality. CARICOM nations do not have viable armies, or defense forces are tiny. Antiguans could fit in a small auditorium. For Caribbean people, war is something that happens far away in failed states, where politics has catastrophically broken down. It is not something we do, and the very idea of military conflict as a tool of policy feels alien. When America speaks of military options and all tools on the table, when aircraft carriers appear on our horizon, they may not realize how foreign this sounds to Caribbean ears. We are not military because that is who we are, as surely as cricket and carnival. This context is essential for understanding the impossible choices now facing Caribbean leaders. Choices that may look like indecision, weakness, or even stubbornness to outside observers, but are in fact the careful calculation that small states' survival demands. Consider the dilemmas when Trinidad and Tobago's Prime Minister offered American forces access to our territory. Venezuela's President Maduro declared it tantamount to an act of war. When Antigua declined a U.S. request to host a military radar installation, we now find ourselves on a travel ban list, while Grenada, still considering a similar request, does not. Cooperate with the Americans and face Venezuelan threats. Decline and risk American displeasure. Accept Chinese infrastructure, investments, and attract Washington's suspicion. Reject it and lose development funding your people desperately need. There is no right answer here, and there is simply no path that avoids all cause. Every choice carries consequences, and the consequences fall not on distant diplomats, but on ordinary citizens, on visa application, on trade relationships, on cost of goods, on opportunities opened and foreclosed. This is why the Caribbean citizens must understand what their leaders are actually navigating. It is easy to demand clarity. Pick a side, state your position, and stand firm. But small states do not have the luxury of grand gestures. Our leverage is limited. Our economies are vulnerable. Our populations can fit inside a single American city. What looks like ambiguity is often wisdom. What looks like hesitation is often the careful maintenance of relationships that cannot be easily rebuilt once broken. And the crisis is real. The United States has assembled its largest military deployment in the Western Hemisphere since the Cuban Missile Crisis. A blockade of Venezuelan oil exports has been ordered. Venezuela has turned to China, Russia, and Iran for support. The Caribbean finds itself where it has always preferred not to be, between great powers in collision. CARICOM's response has been one of improvisation, not coordination, each nation calculating its interests in real time. The region needs to refocus and rapidly pivot to the reality of a global shift that demands nimble, sophisticated diplomacy of a kind we have not needed for generations. My generation understood this. We watched careers disrupted and families divided by a Cold War politics. We knew that maintaining relationships with powerful nations requires constant attention, diplomatic skill, and sometimes difficult trade offs. These are not reasons for resentment, but simply realities of a world where power is distributed unequally and geography matters. The Caribbean zone of peace was never guaranteed. It was a gift of historical circumstance, a generation long pause. That pause is ending, and what replaces it will be determined by skill, the political and diplomatic skill that small states must deploy to survive between giants. I call these skills Caribbean dance moves, the ability to maintain balance while the flow shifts, to move gracefully between partners without losing your footing, and to keep relationships intact when the music changes tempo. These are not skills of resistance and antagonism. They are skills of survival and dignity. They require understanding the tensions between maintaining deep bonds with the United States, bonds driven by geography, bonds of family, culture, and shared values, while also maintaining the sovereign right to chart our own course. Powerful nations will act in their interests. Our task is not to resent this, but to navigate it wisely, preserving what matters most: our relationships, our economies, and our room to maneuver. A generation raised in peace, embedded in American life, and instinctively suspicious of military logic, learned very quickly the grammar of a world they did not choose but must now navigate. The music has started again. My student asks a simple question. The answer, it turns out, is anything but simple. And that is the lesson her generation, all of us, must now absorb. And that is the piece written by Professor Justin Robinson. Let me welcome Professor Robinson to the studios of Up Late and say good night. Professor Robinson, good night.
Hi, good night. How are you doing? It's been a million years since I've seen you, man. It's been
A million years. It has been a million years. And it's really good to see you. I remember, of course, you walking into my history class a million years ago. A young man, and you making us feel comfortable by saying, "Listen, don't call me Mr. Robinson, just call me Justin." Um, and on that note, I must say that your first piece I got was sent to me by my sister, Ingrid Robinson, by the way, and she asked me to let you know that her son is also named Justin Robinson, which is
oh,
my nephew. Yes,
oh,
yes,
nice, nice.
yes. Welcome. So, Justin, how have things been? I know I've followed your career a bit through academia. Give us a little bit of the journey of Justin Robinson.
Yes, so I'm Vincy boy from South Leeward, Kittell's village. That's really my background. Petersville Primary School, St. Martin's Grammar School. Then went to Cave campus, went to University of Florida, and then Manchester. And since then, I've really been in the UE system. Spent most of my career at the Cave campus. And I guess for my sins, I've been given the task of building out the brand new campus in Antigua. And I guess throughout my career, I have been something of what they call in the UE system a public scholar, where I engage the public through the various media as well as serving on a variety of boards. So I think that's a quick summary.
Very quick summary. So let's jump right into your article, Justin, because I've read it a few times, and the more I read it, the more intrigued I am by it. Um, you describe the tensions before I even talk about the tensions of maintaining the relationships interstate. The tensions of the common man in addressing our own realities. We want to go to the US, but we want to see some decisiveness from our leaders. How do you see our Caribbean nations navigating with that? And to give an example, the famed comment by Kamala Persad Besessa that says, listen, all better hush all them out, all the bad mouth in America, but all the what the visa is 350,000 Trinidadians in have US visas, all they want to shop. So all better hush all them out and behave all themselves. How are Caribbean leaders navigating that reality?
Yeah, I think it's important when we have conversations like that to recognize that for as long as I've been alive, you could do both. Huh? You could talk about the US, you could be very critical about the United States, whether internally or externally, and not face what we are facing now. So I think pretending that this, or posturing that there's some normalcy about it, I think the reality is that we are facing a fundamentally changed approach by this US administration. There have always been tensions, there have always been great power rivalry, but a set of nations being listed as not being allowed to get an immigrant visa, you would need a very specific reason beyond expressing your personal opinion to even be denied a visa. So this is really a very different world that we are in. And I think it's important to understand it in that context, in that this is new. The United States has always allowed people to express, to be critical without facing some of the seriously punitive measures that persons are now facing. So it's a new environment. I mean, how do you how do you navigate that? My own sense is it's is that there are no good options in that if you comply, it seems to me that if you comply, what happens is that you avoid being punished. Not that you really get anything. The reward for compliance is not being punished. And at what point are you asked something that you feel you can't give? And then you find yourself in the punishment corner. And clearly, when you don't comply, then you face the punishment. And compliance seems to be defined in a very broad way. Because if you look at the most recent ban on immigrant visas, how has Barbados not complied with anything?
Right. Or St. Vincent
So
for that matter.
right, I don't know that we were asked to host anything or
Right.
or anything like that. So I don't think we really have any good options, and we are really back to a world with might is right. And in a way, you have to decide, what are my red lines?
But one of the things that you mentioned, Professor, is that we have very little leverage. If we are limited in leverage, do we really have the option of drawing lines of any color,
Well, no,
red or whatever?
well, when I say draw a line, there's something you can't do. You just can't live with yourself doing it. And then you have to face the consequences. What it is that I am simply, as a country, as a leader, that I am simply not willing to do. Now, when you make that decision, then you have to be able to live with the consequences of that. And I think it could be a bit of folly to believe that what happens to you depends so heavily on what you did or didn't do. So I'm of the view, for example, with a lot of these travel bans, if you read the document by the Heritage Foundation, the Project 2025 document, which seems to be shaping a lot of the Trump administration policies, that document makes it clear that the United that they are proposing that the U.S. close the door to immigration. The US was known for welcoming, but they're saying that era of immigration is over. That there will be very little opportunity for legal migration. They will seek to close the door on illegal migration, get rid of illegal migrants, and even seek to reverse the status of persons who were legal migrants under different schemes. So that really is a policy position articulated by the Heritage Foundation, which the Trump administration seems to be implemented. And I think whether you agree to something, whatever you agree, they are going to go ahead with that migration agenda. So a lot of this is outside of our control. And then we have to decide, how are we going to try to live in this new environment? Because my view is, based on what I have seen with the policy direction, the administration they're going to go ahead with their agenda. Their agenda is very transparent. It is laid out, much of it, in the Project 2025 document, the National Security Strategy, and so on. And so they are going to go ahead. It's how do we adjust to this world? Do we take the position that you comply and avoid being punished, whatever is asked? That's one. It's actually difficult for me to see how sovereign states actually pursue that as a long-term policy. So I think the conflicts and the punishments I see as inevitable, because it seems the only way to avoid being punished is to comply
Comply.
fully. And I struggle to imagine a world where sovereign countries can actually do that as a long term strategy. At some point, you're going to be asked to do something that is just so
Too much.
you can't cover your nose and swallow it. You just I think you're going to get to some point. That's how I am thinking of the issue in mind.
Now, your piece recounts a story of a student of yours who asked the question that you described as naive. But I want to broaden that, because what that student displayed is something that is evident in people who are even older than that student. How much how much blame do you give, if any, to our education system in not offering our students or young people or young professionals an understanding of that level of Caribbean history, so that they don't understand about Grenada. They have no understanding of Haiti. They have no understanding, very little understanding of Guyana or Trinidad. How much blame, if any, do you ascribe to our education system and what it offers as training information for our students?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to beat up too much on the history. Maybe could always do history better. But I guess one of the lessons from history as a very keen student of history for a long time is across cultures, people don't really give a damn about history until something really affects them. But what I think that student was reflecting and what jumped out at me is that student's lived reality. So if you're somebody 40 and under, y- you've really come of age in a Caribbean that has been peaceful. That Cold War, that great power rivalry was not part of your experience like how it was for me, you know?
Right, right.
I mean, I grew up where I just understood the world in those terms. So Soviet Union camp, US camp. So a lot of what we're seeing now is just what was my lived reality. You know, people talk about Guyana, but the United States preferred Burnham to Chetty Jagan. Jagan had, I think, won those elections. We look at Haiti. The United States preferred Papa Doc and Betty Doc because they were not communist threat. So it really struck me that these students, they just don't have the lived experience for this new world. So now we need a process of re-education. Huh?
So So you mentioned re-education, and I actually went through the history syllabus as outlined on cxc.org, and I wasn't trying to beat up on them, but in the same way, for example, Professor, I was unable, I didn't know anything about Grenadier Revolution, Mars, Bishop, and so forth until I became older and decided to read of it myself.
Right.
So that as we look at Caribbean history, I'm not sure if even within the Caribbean there's still this fear of that teaching about individuals like Morris Bishop, if there's still the anti-communist taboo fear that people feel they may be able to transmit that type of ideology in today's world. But I just think that there's not enough information out there in a formal sense at school level where someone who leaves school at 18 years old, 19 years old from the community college has that level of understanding of Caribbean history from the Caribbean standpoint, detailing the struggles of individual countries and exactly what you're talking about, how we have been able to navigate the tensions from the Cold War and arrive to what you refer to as the lived reality of a zone of peace. I mean, the idea of a zone of peace I first heard of as a diplomat. I was in my
Right.
40s. You understand what I'm saying? And so that concept was new to me until I became a diplomat within the
So you see,
multilateral system.
so I think you're hitting on a very important point where why I say I don't so much wanted to beat up on the history or so on is that, you know, things go through cycles. I think what sort of happened in the last 30 years, we were sort of taught that we were living in this global culture.
Right.
You were being prepared to be a citizen of the world. You know, you kind of were from St. Vincent, you lived in St. Vincent, but you were this global person. What this moment is pushing us to say, well, you know, this global person, is it a fiction, you know? And now you sort of have to reorient yourself to your base. You know, who am I? Now that so I think people are going through some serious self exam. I mean, who am I? Now that this global human being, everybody sort of consume wearing the same kind of clothes, going the same places. So I think that kind of Caribbean heart wasn't emphasized in this global era. But now you have to we now have to go back to base. Who are we now that the global myth has, well, I say quite a myth has seemed to have been exploded, huh?
Right. Right. Uh, Now, the article speaks of a CARICOM perspective. So let's take a little bit an understanding, take a look at the CARICOM perspective, especially since we had the tensions involving the US and Venezuela. Even at home, you would hear people ask from time to time, where's CARICOM? What is CARICOM saying? As if the expectation is that CARICOM as this big entity, this individual entity, should stand up strong and have a voice. But the reality is, the adage that goes, a chain is as strong as its weakest link, is what I think is evident with CARICOM and its positions. How do you respond to the difficulty that CARICOM is having in coming to any singular consensus position?
Right. So again, so CARICOM is a collection of sovereign states. So whatever you see happening with CARICOM is reflective of what is happening in those sovereign states. And I would argue that the very design of CARICOM, that consensus model, does not lend itself to this sort of necessarily unified rapid action because you have to build that consensus. And the reality is that the Caribbean is divided. Guyana feels that it was threatened by Venezuela territorially, so they are taking a particular position. Trinidad, with the change in administration with the UNC, they've taken a very strong pro US. We saw that with the prime minister from Trump one, very supportive there. Jamaica treading a very careful part. I mean, our stereotype would be that the JLP would tend to be pro US and so on. That has where their history, Siaga, coming through. But clearly, they have treaded a very conservative part, trying a way to keep their head below the radar, which is maybe one strategy. The elephant is trashing around, only the grass can get hurt. You try to keep out of the way. Some of the OECS states in particular had much closer relationships with Venezuela. It's very easy
Right.
to forget. It's very easy to forget now when the oil price is low. 10, 15 years ago, when spiking oil prices were really
Yep.
threatening
Yep.
everyday living, it wasn't Trinidad or the US that stepped in to help us. It was Venezuela. So some of those countries have had close relationship with Venezuela, and it's like, well, is this how you treat your friends? So they have, and you see, one of the points I wanted to make in the paper, in the story, I think sometimes people misunderstand how Caribbean people deal with military and warfare. When I went to the US as a student and the UK, one of the things that stood out for me was in those societies their deference to their military people. When you go to Africa and Latin America, the military is one of the most credible institutions in those countries. When you come to the Caribbean, we just don't have that tradition, that perspective. I mean, we are just really not a military people. This people get very suspicious, resentful of a radar in there. What is that about? Why they bringing it here? We have an anti-militarism that doesn't really come from say we anti-America or the policy. It's like if you want, do you want? Think do it on your own. Don't do your own.
Yes.
Don't
Yes.
don't bring us into that. We ain't want no little war. One bomb gonna destroy the whole country. we sort of have that. So CARICOM is very divided. And what you are seeing here in the CARICOM position reflects that division because it is a collection of sovereign nations. And once the positions are divided, I think this will continue. But this could be a real threat to CARICOM. What kind of CARICOM comes out of this, I think, is is really something that we have to think quite deep. I think Guyana has played it quite deftly. I think Guyana is managing it very well. I think Trinidad has taken a very interesting position, which can, I think, have possible implications for CARICOM relationships down the road. But our economies are probably more intertwined with Trinidad and Guyana. So there are
Yeah.
a lot of
Yeah.
layers of complexity. But I think what we see coming from CARICOM is a reflection that it is a collection of sovereign nations, and the nations are divided. And maybe what we might see coming out of this new Cold War or new whatever is something that hasn't been experienced for a long time in the Caribbean, and not in a big way, more in that where powers like the US are actually going to seek to favor particular political parties. They're going to seek to influence elections. They're going to try to get regime change. Don't necessarily need to come from a military intervention. They're going to seek to want client leaders and
Mhm.
be much more aggressive about it than people have experienced in the last 30 years, you know?
Which is hypocritical at best, Professor, because for the last 8 years, even you listen to any meeting of Congress, and there is still talk about the fact that Russia tried to influence the elections, and that's investigations and hearings over hearings and hearings, but the U.S. routinely goes around and meddles in and interferes in and seek to sway the outcome of elections across the globe. Now, I want to move a little bit and talk, as you mentioned with CARICOM, just to follow up, because that was one of the points I wanted to bring out from you. If you think that this challenge, I don't think it's a Cold War anymore when people actually got bombed, and I mean, it wasn't the Caribbean, but our neighbor, Venezuela, got bombed and people were killed, they were invaded. So it's right there, it's an actual war that broke out in the region. When you have things like these, shouldn't these be lessons and circumstances for CARICOM to decide, you know what, we really would be stronger together? We have areas, for example, like climate change, where the more collective and unified opposition, the better we can fare. And now you have the situation in the region where you have 14 countries, 14 votes. I believe that these circumstances are tailor made for us to work together to try and strengthen the bonds and try to come up with more unified positions, more positions that
Well,
make
not
us
all
stronger as a
Caribbean
bloc.
nations, but not all Caribbean nations have climate change at the top of their agenda. So what we are seeing there is that unity just isn't there because there are different interests, and there is and will be an active strategy to have political leaders who are more pliant to the US strategy. So these Caribbean governments are divided because they have different perspectives on how to relate to the United States. So I don't think we're gonna get. We would love to have that unity of position, but there is that division among the nation. Now it seems that the EU has decided that. So for example, the EU is now facing a red line. Greenland,
Right,
because for the most part they have tended to seek to cooperate with the Trump administration
right.
to be compliant. I mean, I mean, it's been very interesting to watch what sometimes look like the groveling from the EU. But they have decided that this is in their best interest. And when I look at what's happening with Greenland, that's where that takes me back to where I started. At what point, when you adopt the compliance strategy, at what point are you going to be asked to do something you can't stomach? And where does that actually lead you? And I think you have to try to understand those red lines. And what are you willing to sacrifice to protect what for you is more sacrosanct? Huh?
Now, you detailed a number of areas that are intertwined. You talked about remittances, you talked about family, you talked about studying. I read an interesting article from the premier of St. Kitts and Nevis, Nevis, General Mark Brantley, and he is suggesting that maybe the time has come for the Caribbean to reimagine migration and seek to bring its people home. And I'm wondering if you believe a position like this would offer some sort of insulation for us against these type of upheaval. He's suggesting that, look, try and bring back your brightest and your best, your most qualified. Offer them incentives. Let them bring their wealth and their knowledge to come back home and build us up. Because keep in mind, Professor, that the US has benefited immensely from migration, and now they're seeking to kick over the proverbial bucket of milk. And so he's suggesting that maybe it's time that governments in a coordinated manner bring our professionals, bring our people back home to reinvest in our country and provide sort of an insulation for us against such upheavals. Any comments
Yeah,
on
no,
that
I
suggestion?
thought it was an excellent piece by my old KFL campus mate there. And what I see as key to that piece is that actions always bring reactions. Huh? These actions that we are facing are going to force us to do things differently. So, for example, when I ran the KFL School of Business and Management, one of our big revenue earners is that we used to run a leadership program. We used to run it in Miami. We had it in the Marriott right next to a mall and so on. And that was a normal thing. Now, if you want to run that, we might have to think, well, do you keep doing that? Do you do it in the Caribbean? Do you do it in Panama? Are we going to see Liat or Inter-Caribbean put on flights to other places? So people are going to have to reimagine their lives because whatever we do, whether we comply or not, the Trump administration appears committed to the Heritage Foundation proposal to pretty much end legal migration into the United States, to vigorously police to the point of eliminating illegal migration and deport people, and even to reverse legal migrants. That option, that window is closing, and professionals might have to reimagine their futures operating in the Caribbean, interacting with other parts of the world, selling your services remotely, and so on. So I really thought Mark's piece was very useful in that. So if you travel between the US and the Caribbean becomes more complicated, some people in our diaspora might find it more profitable to ply their trade in our part of the world. So again, action brings reaction, and we're gonna have to adjust to a brand new world because the United States is really closing the migration option. Uh, I mean, quite frankly, I have a US visa, but I would be a little worried maneuvering in the US. Am I going to be mistaken for an illegal migrant?
Right, and I knock you up.
Right, right. So, So people are going to have to adjust to this. And I saw, so I really thought Mark's piece was excellent from that perspective. Like West Indians in the US and in the Caribbean, we're going to have, I mean, geography is part of our destiny. We have the
Right.
United States there, but there are other parts of the Americas, there are other parts of the world, you know. Are we going to integrate more with Canada? So I think, and in a sense, we're not going to have a choice. This is how I see it, right? You're going to
Mm-hmm.
have, we're going to have to learn to live differently.
Right. Right. I'm going to quote. I'm going to quote a sentence, and I'm not sure I agree, but I'm going to quote, and I'm going to discuss this. It says, "This context is essential for understanding the impossible choices now facing Caribbean leaders. Choices may look like indecision, weakness, or even stubbornness to outside observers, but are in fact the careful calculation that small state survival demands." Professor, how much of it is really cowardice and how much of it is wisdom? Because I have listened to some of the leaders come out following the kidnapping of President Maduro. And there are countries that, coming off of the CARICOM statement, did not even refer to the breach of international law, specifically the UN Charter 2.4. I mean, to me, this showed weakness. But you're suggesting that in many instances, it's really wisdom and a more subtle type of diplomacy that we require small states.
Yeah. So when I wrote that sentence, I was thinking of the Prime Minister of Grenada.
Okay.
In the sense, they had a request, I'm told, to host US radar.
Right.
Now, St. George's University is something between estimates 15 to 20% of Grenada's GDP. Huh?
Okay.
How do they navigate that? I mean, if they say a blanket no, there's a level of leverage with St. George's University that can cripple that economy overnight. So they play it for time. We are considering. So again, so when I was thinking of considerations like that, where the United States just has tremendous. So even these visa things, right? So there's a lot of reaction. Well, you don't have to go to the US for a holiday, etc., etc. But just basic commerce in the Caribbean, requires our business people to travel
Yeah.
to and from.
Yeah. The US.
So again, in Antigua,
It seems that we've lost Professor Robinson there momentarily. Let's see if he tries to rejoin the program. I'm not sure if it's a situation with his uh, device battery. It appears he was using a mobile device. So I'm not sure if it's a matter of the device battery. So I'm going to wait to see if Professor Robinson tries to rejoin the program. But we were talking about whether or not he whether or not it's bravery or cowardice, but I think we have back. Yes,
knocked off there, but
yes,
the Venezuela oil company owns 25% of West Indies oil in Antigua. Biggest company on the island, major employer, major source of government revenue. So can it points to find out that there is a lot of leverage that can impact you negatively. So sometimes playing for time is not necessarily weakness, huh?
okay, okay,
Trying to move in ambiguous spaces is not necessarily weakness. And the point you made, I did another piece recently after the invasion, huh? And after the kidnapping, sorry, and the comments. Really, what is that track? our very, I mean, what seems to be a threat is our very existence as sovereign nations, huh?
Yes, yes,
Because
absolutely, absolutely.
existing as sovereign nations really depends on international law. That legal fiction that the US, St. Vincent, Antigua are peers, they are all equal
Equal.
nations. Now, that has been questioned. I mean, the US president said the only thing that constrains him is his own morality. The Monroe Doctrine was proclaimed when we really didn't have independent nation states. And so, how much sovereignty? So, when I talk about the ambiguity, now we all understand and we say it in our everyday, we are a little two by two countries. We all are, we don't have any illusions. I don't think we ever had any illusions or delusions. But how much sovereignty are you willing to trade? When I talk about red line, that's what I mean.
Right, right.
And when you're not willing to give up a certain level of sovereignty, what is the price you're willing to pay? And I always think all politics is local. Huh? What
Absolutely.
what what is your population thinking about this? So I think in Trinidad and Tobago, the Prime Minister has a fair degree of support because a lot of Trinidadians believe that Trinidad will be rewarded with access to that dragon field, gas field, and others, and they're supporting the Prime Minister. Now, if that doesn't play out that
Right,
way,
right.
because when I look at the Trinidad scenario, I think it's very interesting. Was Port of Spain in on the decision that after the extraction of Maduro, that essentially the regime would remain in place? And if they were not, where does that leave them? Because now the Trinidad Prime Minister, they are persona non grata
Yeah.
with the regime in Venezuela. So these are a lot of nuances, and you have to watch how events unfold. Huh?
Finally, Professor Robinson, well, not the latest, because the latest one is the visa freeze. But just before that, we heard that there's an MOU that apparently all CARICOM countries have entered into regarding the acceptance of third-party refugees. Do you think that that also is playing out part of the same Project 2025 document or their philosophy regarding migration, and the Caribbean is now being used as a dumping ground for unwanted immigrants to the US?
Yeah. So the way I see it is yes. I think it's part of that Project 2025. So again, they don't. The US has the Project 25 says they will try to minimize legal migration to the US, and part of that is the refugee status and so on. So as part of that, they are asking, well, okay, people apply to us for refugee status. Would you be willing to take them? So I agree with you. So again, how do you as a Caribbean country play that? Is that something you can give as part of managing the relationship with Washington that allows you to maintain other more important parts of your sovereignty? Because I think these are a lot of the very skillful decisions. So if you are now going to say, well, okay, you don't want anybody, people are refugees, okay, they can apply to us and we will vet and we will accept who we want or whatever. That might not be that might be good statecraft if you can maintain some control over who you vet as part of your managing your relationship with this very powerful neighbor who can crush you.
And I realize
Because you
that,
see, there's some. So let's say you are St. Kitts, and I'm trying to think of how you are St. Kitts or Dominica. A big chunk of your state revenue is CIP. You're trying to get people off your back with CIP. Is this a reasonable trade off? And our leaders are going to have to make these trade offs. Where I think the leadership could be falling down is that they have to engage their populations. which is part of the reason why I've written the pieces I've tried to do, because I don't pretend to have any answers. I think they are very complex, and you're kind of making it up. I think we're gonna have to make it up as we go
As we go
along.
along.
Look at strategy, but I think the Caribbean population and leadership, we have to have a very clear eye view of where we are now. You know, this is not a case, I think, of the old Cold War where one side was trying to persuade you to come with them and choose their ideology. Now you said comply or face the consequences. This is the world that we are in. In a way, China is not a countervailing power the way the Soviet Union was. And in a sense, in that old Cold War, both sides wanted to use the UN. Now we have a total disregard for the UN, international law. So we are navigating a totally new playing field. And I think we have to have a very clear eyed understanding of that new playing field as we formulate how we approach it. This is not the old game. The rule book has been torn up.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, Professor, I've taken you up for about 45 minutes of your time so far, and we've come to the end of the program. So I really want to thank you for joining us this evening on this program. And I keep reading your pieces, so hopefully on another occasion I can reach out to you again to chat about another of your pieces. And as we put things of the Caribbean into context. By the way, so let me call it Justin now. By the way, Justin, I was talking to somebody this afternoon, and the person said to me, all right, I promise you, I'm not making this up. Because the person asked, who do you have on your program tonight? So I told them. The person said to me, straight off, he's one person I see as potential to lead this country going forward. So I asked, I kid you not. I asked, is he into politics? He said, well, I noticed he's been writing more and more and more. But, that is someone I see as I look from who's around and who's outside. That is someone I see as potentially leading this country. Do you see politics on the horizon, Justin?
No.
That was clear. That was definitive. That was one big shutdown.
Yes,
Thank
yes,
you
yes.
so much. Justin. I appreciate that. Thank you so much for joining the program, and maybe hopefully in the future I'm able to chat with you
Yeah.
again.
Yeah. Thanks for inviting me. Really appreciate it anytime, and all the best with the program.
Thank you so much, Justin. Have a good one. Good night. Thank
All
you.
right.
That was Professor Justin Robinson, Pro-Vice Chancellor of the University of West Indies and Principal of the UE Five Island campus in Antigua. And with this, we've come to the end of another program, Up Late with Sehon Marshall. I truly hope you enjoyed tonight's program and the perspectives brought to you by one of our regional intellectuals, a Vinci boy, just in case. I know you didn't say it, but I sister name, Nellie Robinson's son, Kittles. And he's one of us, and I really hope that you enjoyed his perspective talking about matters of regional importance and putting into context the way this generation is living with the realities that we now face. As he said, I grew up in a time of peace. There was no invasion, there was no war. When I thought of war, it was always something distant. As a matter of fact, I remember when I went to Azerbaijan to study, it was so interesting to me that there were so many of the students who were doing the master's program, even not bachelor's program, were doing security studies, war studies, and I thought, but that was what they knew. Why? Because Azerbaijan has a frozen conflict with Armenia, and then there's Russian big power. They're close to Iran. I mean, and so for them, the issue of security or insecurity is a big deal, and many of them studied or studying security studies, international relations, diplomacy. Why? Because their lived reality is one that required always diplomacy and negotiations because there's always some conflict to negotiate their way out of. In the region, We never had that reality. I never had that reality. And so it was really an eye-opener for me to study in that region that has so many different areas of conflict. Oil, the Caspian Sea, all of the countries that are around the Caspian Sea. How do you divide the minerals in the Caspian Sea? Who gets what? All of those issues. Our lived reality in the region is different. But it's interesting that over the past couple of weeks, we've seen that just an upheaval in our existence. And now, imagine for a couple of days, travelers were stranded in Miami and St. Vincent. They couldn't fly. Why? Because missiles were being flown, were flying across our region. And so airspaces were closed. People couldn't travel. We're not used to that. I can travel from St. Vincent and the Grenadines to North America, to Europe, without fear of my aircraft being shut down. That is not the reality of others in different regions. And so it was interesting to me when Kamala referred to the zone of peace as fakery. Fakery. When in truth and in fact, it was more our reality than anything else. But we've seen that disrupted. And now we are living in an era where might is right. Last week's program, I played for you excerpts of senior U.S. officials telling you that might is right. Damn straight we did, according to Steve Miller, when asked about taking the president of Venezuela. He says this is our backyard. Marco Rubio says that. And we are not going to allow this, and we are not going to allow that. And Jake Tapper asked, he says, but these are sovereign countries. And sovereign countries are allowed to do whatever they want. Isn't Venezuela allowed to sell the oil to whoever they want to, whether it's Iran or Syria or Russia? How can one country tell a sovereign country, you cannot sell your oil to this person or that person, this country or that country? But that's where we're living. And I remember raising the issue. What if the US decides one day that they do not like what is happening in St. Vincent and the Grenadines or Grenada, and they're going to come in and kidnap our leader? What then? What do we say? Because we've seen it and we've acquiesced. We figure, oh, Maduro is a bad man, he's a bad guy, he's X or he's Y, and so that's right for him. Who determines that? The US crash crippled the Venezuelan economy with sanctions for years. And nobody talks about that context. So of course they're going to have problems with basic things. The UK has confiscated millions of dollars from Venezuela in their reserve. So they have no money because of your actions. And then you turn around and say, you see, they're starving their people. And so you're going to bomb him for starving his people, when the reality is your blockade and your sanctions have created hardship in the country. So what if they do that to us? What if they decide, I don't like who St. Vincent's friends are. I don't like who they're aligning themselves with. And so we're going to blockade them and squeeze them and prevent monies from going in. Block Western Union, block MoneyGram, block the trading system, the credit card system. Just block, block, block. You can't send money, you can't wire money. What then? Then they come and say, well, you see, the Prime Minister or the government of St. Vincent and Grenadines is repressing its people. People are broken. They can't afford food. Not withholding from you the fact that it's all actions as the US, as a big state, that's causing that to happen. And then decide, based on that, we are going to come in and kidnap your leader and carry him to the US to get tried. What then? Those are the realities that we live in now. And as Professor Robinson says, these are the things that we have to navigate. It requires, though, like he said, a clear understanding of the issues. Do we think our government, it's a new government, I admit, do we think they're clear-eyed and they have a clear-eyed view of the issues at play and possess the ability to navigate these issues? Listen, I am not wishing them anything negative at all. Because ultimately, if our government is unable to navigate these waters, then this ship of state called St. Vincent and the Grenadines is in real trouble. And I am of Vincentian. I have nowhere else to go. So I'll be affected. And so I really hope that our government put their collective energies together, seek, whether it's through regional consultation or wherever, seek to grasp exactly what is happening right now. Get beyond monitoring and evaluating, or monitoring and assessing, and seek to develop a plan, having understood the issues at play of how St. Vincent and the Grenadines can move forward. And when that is done, like Professor Robinson said, engage the population, engage Vincentians, and let them know. That is one of the criticisms I have with our government. The fact that it has not been able to promptly engage its people. I've heard 2 statements from our Minister of Foreign Affairs, and I am not satisfied with any of them because they've not said anything. And this is not me just criticizing the Honorable Fitzgerald Bramble just because. None of his statements have really done anything in terms of informing our population as to what is happening, where things are, and where we go. None of his statements. And so I really hope that greater effort is made in understanding where things are, bringing the information to our people, bringing the information to us in a manner where we can understand what is happening, and offering credible options, offering us credible solutions as to how we are, or information as to how we intend to move forward. Assessing and monitoring can't be our response to every diplomatic issue, every foreign policy snag that our country faces. I've gone over time. I've spent a bit more time than normal, but that's fine. Let me thank you so much for joining. And again, let me encourage you to subscribe to our channel. It's only about 20-something% of the individuals watching the program have actually subscribed. So please subscribe to the channel so you can get the notifications. Please share the live whenever you're here and continue to watch. And please give us your feedback. All right, give us your feedback. Let us know how you enjoy the program. Let us know what are some of the positives that you take away from the program, and let us know some of the things that you also would like to see improved where the program is concerned. I believe tonight we had good sound, we had good lighting. The camera isn't focusing in and out like it was previously, so we've sorted quite a number of things out. So I believe tonight's audio, video, and lighting and so forth was a lot better than it was previously. So my director has sorted things out. So you could thank my director in that regard. So again, let me thank you so much for viewing, and hopefully I would see you again next Thursday when we have another exciting program of Upplate. Oh, by the way, sorry. There's a video I have on TikTok. Check it out. It's also on YouTube. So you could look at it on YouTube or you could look at it on TikTok. But strange enough, it has gotten a lot of traction. Let's see. On TikTok, the video, I would tell you, I'm going to tell you right now, hold on a second. The video has had over 8,000 views already on TikTok. Over 8,000 views with 57 comments. It's the most comments I've ever gotten on any video, except for the one where people thought I was cussing NDP. Let me see how many comments I got for that one. And I wasn't there. I really wasn't. I'll tell you. Where is it again? This one. Right. This one had 93 comments, right? Yeah. So that one had plenty of comments because people were really cussing me on that one. But this video that I did, just with a snapshot of the way the US is using its leverage to reward, like Professor said, or punish countries. And my video was simple. I wasn't trying to suggest, or didn't suggest at all, that they were tourist visas. And some people came on trying to talk about what it's tourist visas and so forth. That wasn't the point I was making at all. The point I was making was simply this. You saw it on this program where Marco Rubio said there are countries that cooperate with us openly regarding the action in Venezuela. He named Trinidad, he named Guyana, he named the Dominican Republic. Cooperated openly. And I just found it quite instructive that of the list of CARICOM countries that had this visa freeze, regardless to whether it's tourist visas, work visas, student, whatever it is, the point is, of the countries that have experiencing this freeze, the 2 countries in CARICOM that were listed as cooperating publicly regarding the intervention in Venezuela were not placed on that list. That's the point I was making. That's the point I was making. And whether Kamala was right or wrong is not my business. I'm not a Trinidadian. I was just making an observation. That's all I was doing. Right? So check the video out. It's about 5 minutes long. It's right here on YouTube. You can check it out after the program. It's on TikTok for those of you on TikTok. And again, please, please, please subscribe to the subscribe to the, so I guess the Larry King thing didn't make it. Don't worry, next week I'm going back with my jacket, it's fine. So please subscribe to our channel, Uplift with Sehon Marshall, so you can get all of the notifications, all right? Again, thank you so much for tuning in tonight. Went a little bit over time, but that's all right. Thank you so much, and see you, God's willing, next Thursday. Have a good weekend.